Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming along today and joining us in our latest residential property forum. Your contributions to this session and your feedback are really valuable to us. So don't feel shy, raise your hand, let us know what you think and let us know if there's anything else you want us to talk about. Once again, Ian Quayle will be leading the discussion today, but this is your forum and your knowledge and experience are a very important part of today's forum. So if you have any topics you want to raise or if you want to contribute, please use the chat facility and raise your hand and we can unmute your microphone. With that said, I will hand over to Ian.
Thank you very much, Liz, and good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to see you all. Liz and I were just saying there, you know, we're busy people, and just before the sort of Easter break, I'm really grateful for you taking time out to come along today. As Liz says, this is your event, and I'm happy to discuss anything that is troubling you or any issues or burning topics that you've got. A little bit for those of you that haven't come along to these things, we started doing these forums in England and Wales. Basically, because I was asked to attend a forum on compliance, and I sort of sat for an hour and put my two penneth in connection with compliance issues for property law related matters. And I thought this would be brilliant for conveyancers. But then I thought, well, but conveyancers aren't going to be willing to share good practice, problems, how to resolve problems, etc. So with some trepidation, to be honest with you, I suggested to Stewart Title that we tried a pilot webinar in England and Wales for residential conveyancers. And for the first 10 minutes or so, it was awful. It was just me rabbiting on about anything and everything, and no one willing to contribute. Then all of a sudden, bang, someone put something in the chat about a topic that was of concern to them, and off we went. So webinar number 1 was a resounding success. That was in October last year. As a consequence of that, we immediately started doing a forum for commercial property lawyers, a forum for local authority lawyers, a forum for support staff, trainees and people new to conveyancing. And they've continued, and due to their success, we had a look and thought, well, let's see what Scotland is like and Northern Ireland is like. And I have to say, as far as attendance is concerned, Scotland far exceeds attendances at all of our other events, which is brilliant. So the aim is that each month we will discuss topics, any topics that people have. We've got all manner of different speakers now lined up for the remainder of the year to come along and to talk to you about all manner of different things. But the important thing that I want to get over, as Liz mentions, it's your event, not my event. I've got some topics that I want to talk about today, but I am happy and I'm indeed delighted if someone else takes the floor and takes the lead with regard to anything that is a burning issue or burning problem. In addition to that, if you had sort of speakers that you would like us to contact, or if you've got people that you'd like us to ask to come along, more than happy to do that. We do have a barrister from Terra Firma Chambers who will be coming along to talk about issues in connection with his professional practice in property law related matters, and there are 1 or 2 other sets of advocates that have expressed an interest too. But if you've got anyone, or if you have a particular topic that you're interested in or you consider yourself an expert in, again, let me know or let Liz or anyone at Stewart Title know, and we'll gladly bring you along to have a chat and to share your expertise. The thing that impresses me is I was fundamentally wrong with this idea about conveyancers not being willing to share and lawyers not being willing to share. If there's one overriding message I've got out of doing these forums, which we now do on a regular basis, is that people are very, very willing to collaborate, very willing to share ideas, good practice, ideas about product, etc., which is absolutely fantastic. So we will continue with these things indefinitely. We're also in the process of trying to produce a quarterly newsletter on property law related matters for Scotland. Again, as far as that is concerned, we're just trying to finalise content, finalise ideas, but I'd love to get that off and running. And Liz and I were just talking that I'd be delighted to attend any conferences, etc., that are property law related in Scotland to discuss what we're doing and to sort of bang the drum, as it were, with regard to these events. So a massive welcome to you all. A massive welcome and thank you to Stewart Title. Stewart Title are title indemnity insurers who I've worked with for many, many years now. And it has been a delight to work with Stewart Title for 3 reasons. Firstly, the people are lovely to deal with, straight, decent, hardworking, know their stuff, and a delight for me and my organisation to be associated with. Secondly, good products. And again, as far as England, Scotland and Northern Ireland is concerned, all products are good quality products. And where Stewart Title are unable to provide a product to meet a particular need, where there is need, a willingness to pivot and a willingness to look at the need and to see if it's possible for a product to be created to meet that need. So this idea, this willingness to be flexible with regard to that, I think is so important. So on the slide here are the contacts for Scotland, John and Elizabeth, 2 lovely people who know Scotland well, and I'm sure some of you will be very familiar with both of them. Happy to talk to you about your needs in connection with indemnity insurance. Happy to sort of explore your requirements and to have a look at individual risks or issues that you have to see if they can help. Elizabeth's taking the chair today and looking after the IT side of things alongside my colleague Natasha. So do speak to John, do speak to Elizabeth. You may well be an existing customer, but it's still worth making contact to see what's new, to see what's happening with regard to Stewart Title. So the important thing as far as today is concerned, things I'd like to talk about. I want to talk about AML for residential conveyances in Scotland, and in particular where there are AML issues in connection with geographical clients, international clients, etc. I want to look at that. I want to have a look at some case law with regard to servitude rights of access. And I want to start today by talking to you about effective communication with clients and how we review and assess how effective we are with regard to communication. So this is a subject that I spend a lot of time on in England and Wales, looking at what we're communicating with clients, how we're communicating with clients, and where we can improve. And one of the problems that I've encountered, and one of the things that I feel really sorry about, given the work that I do, is that I'm encouraging lawyers to provide more and more information to clients. And as a consequence of that, professional indemnity insurers and others are saying, hang on a minute, there's a danger. If we're sending clients information when we're onboarding the client, when we're accepting instructions, that's 50 or 60 pages in length, surely the key messages within that communication are being lost. Further, where we have considered the title to a property on behalf of a client and we're submitting a report to the client before we're in a position to proceed, again, we're bombarding the client with a whole wealth of information. And is that information designed to inform the client, or is it to protect ourselves? So I did an exercise with a firm and we looked at the communications that we were having with clients, and we were saying, right, to what extent is that communication assisting the client or protecting us? And we attempted to eradicate as much as possible of the communication that was protecting the firm and tried to exaggerate, to try and expand on the meaningful information that we were trying to provide to clients. The problem with adopting that exercise is there is a base level of information that the client needs about the transaction, about your firm and about the role. So my first question to people today is, have you reviewed your communication with clients? Do you have standard communication about the conveyancing process and your role in the process that you provide to clients when you're onboarding the client? Next question, do you use external resources? Are there external resources that you can utilize to explain to the client the process that you're embarking upon on the client's behalf? So let's just drill down and let me ask some questions. Are there any external resources that you can provide to me, assuming I'm a client of yours that's buying a property in Scotland? Or if I'm a first-time buyer or someone new to a purchase in Scotland, is there a lack of information from external sources, and therefore you're having to provide that explanation to me yourself. So again, I'm going to open that up to the floor. Susan, David, Jamie, what does your firm do with regard to the provision of information? Do you explain the process that you're embarking upon with regard to a disposition or acquisition on behalf of a client? Do you explain the documentation that the client will be encountering and the consequences and significance of that? Priyanka, hi Priyanka, how are you? Brilliant. You explain the conveyancing process to the client. Once the file is set up, our AML team with all onboarding, SOF checks, and pass it back to us with a completed for approval. Fantastic. So, lovely. Yeah, I am. Thank you, Priyanka. Priyanka, can I ask then, the explanation of the process, is that something that you've internally created, or is there a resource out there that you could refer me to? If we're trying to think about not bombarding the client with information, but at the same time, this balancing exercise of providing the clients with sufficient information, how do we deal with it? David, yeah, a meeting or phone call with the client to avoid emails. We have a buyer's guide that we sent the client. Is that something, David, that you send via email, or is that something on a website that I could look at if I were a client of yours? But thanks for that, David. And thanks again, Priyanka. I think it's so important that we look at this. Yeah, send a client guide to the Scottish Standard Clauses. Yeah, that's Pamela. That's a document I've seen, isn't it? I think. Did the Law Society of Scotland produce that, or did the Edinburgh Solicitors Group or Glasgow Solicitors Group produce it, Pamela? I can't remember, but I think I've seen it. So I'm just waiting for Pamela to answer that. But that's really, yeah. So I thought it was. So see this, I think it's important, if there are external resources that we can use, then we should use them. Because I was talking to an insurer who was saying, look, if you send a 70-page email or letter to a client, the client's not going to read it. And there'll be key bits of information in that document the client needs to understand and to interpret. And we're losing the key messages by the volume of communication with the client. I think, as Pamela, David, and Priyanka are saying, it's important that we upload information to the client up front when we're onboarding them. Hi, Marie. I hope you're well. How's selling buying guide available to download from our website? So is the idea of this, Marie, that anyone that accesses your website can see it? Or is it I can only see that once I've been onboarded as a client of your firm? Right, Priyanka, yeah. So do you have those templates, Priyanka, and do you provide them to me as and when we hit the step or that particular process? Or do you provide it up front? All right, and Marie's saying anyone can download it. Yeah, that's really useful. But as far as the Law Society is concerned, or any other professional body, for example, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, there isn't a sort of conveyancing guide for clients as such. If there is, it's something that you as a firm have produced, yeah? Got you. Okay, interesting. Right, and again, we were talking about feedback earlier, and it was interesting. Liz was talking about feedback earlier too. And I was saying to someone last week that positive feedback is brilliant, isn't it? To sort of, so you can polish your badge and perhaps go and ask for a pay rise. But really positive feedback doesn't really help, does it? Because, if someone says you're brilliant, you say, well, thanks very much, but you don't learn anything. So do we ask for feedback from clients about how effective our communication has been? Again, this is something that I recommend to firms all the time. When a conveyancing transaction has been concluded, particularly where the transaction hasn't gone well, to ask the client for feedback. And when I've suggested this to firms, there's been a reluctance or a hesitancy to get it to do that. But can I tell you from bitter experience, I have once thought that I've lost clients because the experience in the conveyancing process has been bad, and sometimes been bad due to me. Sometimes it's been bad because, hey, the transaction has been a nightmare, or a third party has created a problem. But when I've asked that, when I've said to the client, look, let's just go through and try and have an assessment of what went well and what went badly and why and what we can do to improve. When I've done that, the client's attitude has changed. So the client might have been negative, and in fact might have been in a situation where you think, well, I'm never going to see that client again. But the moment you invite criticism, you invite collaboration to discuss how things can improve, you might just find that the relationship flicks and turns, and someone that you thought was a lost cause all of a sudden becomes back into the fray. I have to tell you again, to be honest, that's happened on occasions, and I've thought, well, crikey, the client was such a nightmare. What have I gone and done? I don't want to act for them ever again. But you get the message, don't you? So again, what sort of client feedback do you look to or do you get in connection with how you communicate? So Priyanka, if I can ask you, at the end of a transaction, will you do research with the client, or does your firm as an organization sort of look for client feedback? And again, what is that feedback? Are there any messages that are coming back from clients? Are we providing information the client gets and understands? Are we sending information to the client that the client doesn't understand? There's a firm I do a bit of consultancy work for in Cardiff in Wales. And when they're sending information out to the client, they send a quiz sheet out for the client to complete, so that the client has to read the documentation in order to answer the quiz questions. Now, I think that's dangerous, because some of the clients I've acted for in the past would have a go at the quiz and get things hopelessly wrong. And then what do you do? This point about effective communication is so important. If I can put it at its simplest, I think what it means and what it involves is, at its simplest, asking a client to confirm they've received our email or our documentation, and that they've read it and they've understood it. Now, I just want to have a look for a moment at David's point. This phone call with clients to discuss processes, etc. Okay. Again, great idea, David. And certainly it's an issue, I think, that we've got to know our clients. Okay. And to do that, I think communicating via email is highly dangerous, because we don't know them. Okay. A conversation with the client, ideally face-to-face meeting, phone call or Zoom or Teams meeting, if we must, I think is essential. Okay. And I think that the thing is, when we're having that conversation, David, at the end of it, I would want to say to my client, look, I'm going to assume you've understood everything that we've discussed. If you haven't, let me know. And I'd also be saying to the client, do you have any questions? So it's one of the things I think we pepper our communications with. Have you understood? Do you have any questions or queries? And the other thing, David, I'm very interested in, and thanks for your contribution today. It's really appreciate it, David. Do you make an attendance note with regard to that phone call or meeting? And again, attendance notes, right? Insurers are always bleating to me about remind conveyancers of the need to make full and detailed attendance notes. And it sounds fantastic until on a Thursday morning, you've had 47 emails, 10 telephone calls, and 2 meetings, and a host of interruptions from colleagues, etc. How on earth are you able to make notes about all of those issues? It's impossible. What I always say to practitioners is there's certain conversations with certain clients in certain transactions at certain points within the transaction where I think it's foolhardy not to make a note of an attendance note or a conversation, particularly where clients are difficult, particularly where clients are struggling to understand, or particularly where there is risk associated with decision making. So you're saying to a client, look, there are issues with regard to this title, there are issues relating to this servitude or whatever it is that you need to be aware of. And our client, as our clients frequently do, have a cavalier attitude and say, well, no, it's fine. If we're quite happy to proceed on that basis. Often clients are quite happy to proceed on the basis of their understanding, but they don't understand the significance or consequence of the point that we're making. So David, yeah, but sometimes it does, David, yeah. But here's a question, David. If you've had a meeting with me, right, and you've warned me, look, Ian, there's an issue here that I think is of concern, and my view is that we perhaps ought not to be thinking about proceeding with this transaction. And I said to you, Dave, thanks very much. I know what I'm doing. My partner loves this house. We've got to have it. Okay. I'm sure we've all had conversations of that nature or similar in the past. And in those circumstances, I'm not afraid about asking a client to sign a copy of an attendance note, or where I've, David, written to them after a meeting, asked them to confirm receipt of the letter and confirm that they've understood the significance of the risk. The reason is that we've got clients who are best of pals during the conveyancing process, but if something ultimately goes wrong, or on acquisition of a property, there is an issue that means there's an issue with regard to resale, or there's an issue with regard to remortgage, or there's a dispute with a neighbour, etc., then the clients are very quick these days to point the finger at, hey, who's liable for this loss or this mistake? And invariably, as a conveyancer, we can be in the firing line. I'm going to deal with Priyanka's point about at the end of the transaction. Yeah. Yeah. You make a great point, Priyanka, that how easy it is for a client to leave a review, and how comfortable is a client in making a review. Obviously, Priyanka, some clients, if it's negative, don't want to be confrontational and tell you directly. So, the idea of anonymizing reviews might be useful. But I think as well as having that procedure, which you've got, and most firms do have, Priyanka, an informal chat with the client, particularly when there's been a problem or a misunderstanding or something of that nature, just to try and extract what the problem has been and what we can do to alleviate it. A, is helpful, and B, can sometimes sustain or reinvigorate a relationship. Yeah, David's saying that he would follow up the conversation with a letter confirming instructions on a point. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Can I ask a question? On survey and valuation, right? Would we always instruct a buyer client to have a survey or valuation? And have you seen, does the RICS Scotland have a consumer guide to survey and valuation? So if you're acting for me and I'm buying an old property somewhere in Scotland, would you advise me to obtain a survey or valuation of the property? Number one. Number two, does the RICS in Scotland produce a consumer guide to the obtaining of a survey or valuation? Because there are different levels of survey and valuation. Some are more expensive than others, but more meaningful and more useful than others. And again, rather than simply advising the client about the availability of the survey, explain to the client the various choices. So, Gerald, yeah, most clients rely on the home report. Then we do bring that to the client's attention. But the point there, Marie, that is, does the RICS have guidance about the types of survey that a client can obtain? I'm familiar with the concept of the home report, rather, but where there is a recommendation or indeed an issue that the client generates, is there any RICS guidance on the point? Priyanka, if no mortgage involved, it's your decision to make without a survey evaluation. Could lead to issues. Yeah. So you'd always recommend in writing that the client does have a survey or valuation, Priyanka. Yeah. But does anyone actually tell the client about the choices that are available? Because again, I think that's important. Because some surveys, the more expensive surveys, the surveyor is going to look at issues that a home report or a valuer might not look at. And the same thing, I think, applies with regard to client inspection. We're always going to tell a client of the significance of inspecting the target property they're acquiring, yeah? But do we tell the client what we're asking the client to look out for when they inspect? And I think I asked this early on in one of these forums. Would you inspect a residential property on behalf of a client? not as a matter of course, but if there was an issue, well, might you inspect as a matter of course, particularly if it's a sort of a high value property with a good client? What would you inspect? Hannah, would you do that? Alison? Anybody else? Would you inspect on the client's behalf? Gerald, what about you? Because certainly, Gerald is saying no, he wouldn't. Okay, Gerald, the reason, hey, I'm a conveyancer, I'm a solicitor, and therefore, it's not my role. Home report, your own inspection is really what we're depending on what the seller reveals. Or is there another reason, Gerald? And anybody else would take an opposite view to Gerald? Certainly in England and Wales, your insurers would say, we don't want you to inspect the property. Or if you do inspect, yeah, exactly, from a risk perspective. Pamela, might someone, yeah, otherwise, no. If you did inspect, you would have to tell the client the purpose of inspection. Hi, David. Where the boundary issue, yeah, exactly. You're not going to go just to view the property and to check on the state of the roof or anything like that. But if there was an issue relating to the title, then you should inspect, perhaps. And if you do inspect, you've got to tell the client the purpose behind your inspection. Priyanka, David, right? So you've done a site visit before. I would always discuss the home report in full with clients, highlight any issues. The purchaser ultimately responsible to review this and raise any concerns. Yeah, you wouldn't view the property directly. No, okay, that's fine. Again, but does anyone sort of tell a client about the significance and importance of inspection? And the concept of notice and awareness of issues. So, like David was saying, if there was a boundary issue, you'd want your client to inspect to check that what the boundary issue is and to provide a report. And if the home report flags something up, Priyanka, thanks for that, you would perhaps inspect the property. Okay. When you're reporting to the client, are you going to tell the client that you've recommended inspection? The client, you're aware the client has inspected, but not reported anything of concern back to you. Gerald, hi Gerald. You would assume they would have viewed the property prior to instructions. Run an additional survey if home report refers to structural issues, damps, etc. Yeah, Gerald. Okay, so you're going to assume that there's been an inspection. You're not going to tell the client about what the significance of that inspection is. The sort of caveat emptor sort of principle. No, okay, that's fine. Right, David, we have a clause in our standard which states we assume the client has read the home report, satisfied unless they've raised any specific issues with us. Yeah, Priyanka, does that remind you back of your law lectures and contract, etc.? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting. This point about effective communication with clients, about are we producing information to the client that's easy for the client to digest? Are we ensuring that our communication is a two-way process, so we're getting feedback from our client that yes, they appreciate the risk, yes, as when Gerald inspected the property or recommended additional survey, we've got feedback from the client as to what they're doing or what they want us to do, or their understanding of risk. I always say to conveyancers, your task isn't necessarily to define or determine the extent of risk, just simply highlighting to the client the existence of risk. And I think that's some of the points that we've extracted from what people have been saying thus far. Okay, brilliant. Does anyone have any other comments to note on this before we go to my first topic on the slide here, which are AML issues? Anyone got anything else that you want to add to what we've said so far? I'm going to have a look on the RICS website to see if there's anything on survey and valuation in Scotland. And I'm also going to have a look to see if there's anything by way of a guide for clients, sort of consumer guide to the conveyancing process. So I'll keep you informed on that little exercise next time we get together. Derek, hi Derek, thanks for this. Going wrong because there's no inspection. Yeah. So, Derek, can I take from this then that you will always inspect a property? Yeah. Okay. The interesting thing is, yeah, in the past, I think you just got to be careful what you do. The reason I'm sort of hesitant to be supportive of you, Derek, is I've dealt with a negligence claim where a lawyer inspected a property, and again, looking at a boundary issue, then the client asked them something about some damp, and the lawyer, by way of throwaway remark, said, I think that's just condensation, and it wasn't. And a claim was brought against the lawyer's insurers. Now, there were all sorts of arguments. First of all, how on earth is a solicitor conveyancer going to know the difference between rising damp and condensation? Number one. Number two, why on earth would a client rely on a throwaway remark from a conveyancer or solicitor? It's like being asked about, well, do you think the central heating system or the central heating boiler appears in satisfactory condition? How on earth is a solicitor conveyancer going to know that? They're certainly not going to hold themselves out as an expert in that particular field. But in that particular case, the insurers paid out on a claim. And what they said was, if you're inspecting the property, you should tell the client the purpose of your inspection. And I think, Derek, given the fact that you're saying that's what you always do, and the Law Society of Scotland advise it, that you would ensure the client understood the purpose of your inspection. Can you just sort of clarify that? And David's saying, well, yeah, if fees permit an inspection would be appropriate, but given the charges that we're levelling at clients, in most cases, it's not going to be appropriate. You can't unmute your mic. I don't know if we can do that for you, Natasha or Liz. If can unmute Derek, that would be great. David, I would say if you were going to inspect the client, inspect on the client's behalf, you could charge for that service. And again, David, which leads me on to another point, fixed fees for conveyancing, quotations, estimates, call them whatever you will. If a transaction becomes unusual, as long as you tell the client that you're going to have to revise the fees before you do the additional work and give the client choice, then you can revise your fees. There's law on that point. So, if there's an issue and you say, well, look, it would be important for me to come out and inspect, then you could say to the client, if you want me to do that, there will be a charge. And again, David, you'd expand the scope of your retainer so that the client was aware of the fact you were doing this additional work and the limitations relating to it. Derek makes the point, dampness. Yeah. Hey, Derek, there's no way in a million years, if I'm inspecting a property, I'm going to throw a line away about what I think that is or that isn't with regard to condensation, the state of the garage roof, or indeed anything else. So you'd have to say, Derek, to an extent, the lawyer was the author of their own misfortune. But again, there's always a risk of that occurring. I mean, I've attended auctions, on face-to-face auctions with clients buying property. And again, the client right at the 11th hour has raised a question about a property that they're just about to bid on. And again, there's a danger that you get sort of sucked in by the client and provide sort of off-the-cuff advice that shouldn't have been provided. So there's always that danger, isn't there? But I agree with you, Derek, about that. I don't know if we're able to get Derek's microphone on or if there's an issue.
I think I've put it on. If Derek wants to try, it's coming up.
Derek, can you try? Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much. Derek, we'll try. If we can't, then perhaps another time.
I've put on allow mic.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Don't know whether you can or not. Well, Derek, if you can, just speak up and we'll have a chat. Okay, right. Hello, Derek. Yes, I can hear you.
Ah, right. Okay. Yes, as a matter of, I've seen too many things going wrong. The very first flat I ever bought myself,
yeah,
I got 2 flats for the price of 1.
Yeah.
Simply because the purchasing solicitor on my behalf, or a seller solicitor, never went and inspected. Very simply, it said the top floor flat at 20 Drummond Place Now, the
Yeah.
top floor flat, years beforehand, had been converted into 2 flats.
Right.
So I got title to 2 flats.
Yeah.
Now, I was okay. It all got corrected in the end. It didn't matter. But
Yes.
that's why all my life I've been saying you must go and check. There may be something perfectly obvious
Yeah.
that everybody else has missed.
Yeah.
For instance, the first floor flat. Oh, hang on, there are 2 flats.
Yes.
In the first floor flat. I'm
Yeah.
just investigating one in Glasgow at the moment.
Right.
A basement flat. The title says the westmost and the eastmost basement flat. Through checking the titles and making an inspection, I discovered 3 basement flats. No one can tell which is which.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's why it would be part of my fee always to go and inspect, unless it's good
go and
reason
have a
not.
look.
I mean, if you insist on instructing me and it's the other end of the country, I would say, well, no, you couldn't go to it or whatever. But normally, I've just seen too many going wrong.
Yes, well, I agree, you know, but the only thing I would say, thank you, Dave, for that, by the way. The only thing I would say is that where you're reluctant to inspect, what you can do, as Derek was mentioning there, is make sure that when the client inspects, they're aware of what they're looking out, what you would like them to look out for, and what they should report. So where you've got agents' particulars, etc., or a description of the property in the title, then making sure the client is aware of what you've got, provide it to them and ask them to check and confirm that, yeah, you know, if this is a first floor flat, sure enough, when they inspect, the flat is on the first floor and there isn't a sort of mezzanine floor or something of that nature, or there isn't a sort of storeroom beneath that's part of the flat or something of that ilk or type. I'm just going to look at David for a moment. Hi, David again. Extra work. Tell the client it's beyond the scope of the original fee. Trying to avoid the work fixed fee or fee quotation. Yeah. Again, this case law that says if you give a client an estimate as to your fees, you're obliged to adhere to that estimate unless there's an objectively valid reason for the estimate being revised upwards. So when you're providing an estimate or a quote with regard to fees, it would be attached to a caveat that this is assuming that the transaction proceeds normally and that you reserve the right to charge additional fees if the transaction becomes abnormal, giving the client the sort of examples of where additional fees could be incurred. And then what you do is, if you hit the hurdle, so there is something unusual or different about the transaction, you draw it to the client's attention. You then explain to the client has a choice, either not proceeding, given the fact that this additional work is required, or instructing you to proceed, but with an agreement that your fees are being revised. There is an inherent danger in doing or performing that exercise as and when the transaction is concluded. But as long as you tell the client at the point that the additional work is required and invite the client to instruct you to proceed notwithstanding, then I think you're safe. And I think fixed fee or quotation is a dangerous terminology, David, as you allude to. But again, there are some clients that will want to know that, you know, that you're going to be performing and providing your services within their budget. But it's perfectly reasonable to tell the client from the outset that you've given a quotation or estimate on the basis that this is a standard transaction, and if it becomes non-standard, then you reserve the right to charge more. And it may be inspecting the property, a requirement to inspect would warrant an additional fee. It may be, like we were talking earlier, about taking out a title indemnity policy that you would charge for the work that's undertaken relating to that policy, which leads me to the question. Let's open that to the room this afternoon. If you were taking out a defective title insurance policy, clearly either the buyer or the seller client is going to be paying the premium, but would you charge an additional fee for the fact that you are advising the client in connection with the taking out of that policy? Can I tell you, in my experience, most firms don't, but you can. Certainly, Marie, yeah, because there is additional work involved, isn't there, Marie? Amy, your firm doesn't. Okay. Why is that, Amy? Is it because you know you build it into your fee to start with, or it's just something you haven't thought about? But Amy, the point I would make and I'm sure Marie will sort of support this, is there is additional work that needs to be done, isn't there? And therefore, you know, why, and you know, you can't say that taking out a title indemnity policy is a matter of course in connection with every transaction. So, Amy, if you can just help me on that one, is there a reason why you don't? I mean, you know, it might be from a goodwill perspective that you wouldn't want to charge, but you certainly can. And I would certainly advocate, given that there is additional work, that you ought. Anybody else then? Marie's saying her firm does. David, we reserve the right. Yeah, but given the level of premium that's charged by the indemnity, it sometimes looks awkward why our additional fee is higher than the premium charged. Yeah, I get that, David. There can be, I can understand why there might be a bit of resistance from the client. But David, you know, given the fact there is additional work to do, I don't see why, apart from it looking awkward, why there'd be resistance from the client. And certainly when you're onboarding the client, David, I would always advocate that you give the client examples of where you might charge additional fees. So I'm just looking at Priyanka. Hi, Priyanka. We don't, but definitely think something to think about. Some firms charge a fee to arrange a copy title sheet. Seems difficult to justify when, yeah. So yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's a limit, Priyanka, isn't there? I mean, I've known some firms that charge for sort of postage or photocopying, etc., as part of the conveyancing process. And I know the Law Society don't like that. If you're giving a fee for conveyancing services, there's an expectation that these things are incorporated. But I certainly know that the Law Society in England are quite happy with firms charging for the work that they have to do in order to take out an indemnity policy. So, right, yeah, Ross, hi, Ross. We would consider rent as an incidental, wouldn't charge for that service. Well, that's fair enough for us. Ross is perfectly entitled to that view. But equally, you could charge for it. Ross, actually, you make an interesting point there, you know, where you're doing something that is over and above what you've quoted or estimated for. I think there is mileage in making sure the client is aware of what you're doing. And again, this is something that when I'm doing presentations to firms, I always say, look, if you don't tell me that you're doing additional work and you're not charging me for it, there is an opportunity for generating goodwill that's lost. So if, as in Ross's case, you are taking out a policy, I think it's important that I, as a client, understand that you could charge and you're not charging for it. And again, I look at this and come at this from a slightly different angle, right? If you're doing something additional to the standard conveyancing service, because there's a problem, it's important the client understands there is a problem, because that problem could generate a delay or could cause, you know, it could cause the other side to be concerned, or the agent, if there is an agent, to get to intervene, etc. So it's important that you're operating on an open book basis to say to the client, look, you know, there's an additional problem here that I'm trying to resolve. I'm not charging you for it, but you need to understand that. Oh, Priyanka, that's the charge, is it, for the copy title sheet, £3.60? Yeah. David, I'm looking to update our fee estimates to include where additional fee. I think it's a great idea, David. So you're saying there's a standard fee, but if this happens, then normally we would charge that, but we reserve the right to charge on a time basis, perhaps, David. And Valia, hi, Viala. Viala, I hope I've got your name right. I hate getting people's name wrong. May charge depending on the nature of the insurer as how much work has to be done. Yeah, title indemnity is required, including level of correspondence. Yeah, that's a fair point. You may be in correspondence with Liz. You may have one or two conversations with Liz about a peculiar policy. In which case, why not, you know? And again, I think as long as you say when you're onboarding the client that there is the potential to charge, then Vala, it's a matter for you, isn't it? I think if you don't say then that's where you're going to meet resistance from clients. So if you can, as David's saying, give the client a sort of an idea of where additional cost could be incurred, that can be useful. When I say that, David, I'm reminded of a firm that when they're onboarding a client, they tell the client about everything that can go wrong in the conveyancing process and why transactions can abort. And I think, well, that's being open, isn't it, and being as frank as you possibly can. But I think it's not particularly good from a client's perspective to know at the outset, hey, look, these are the potential problems that could arise during the life of the transaction. David says, I wouldn't view titling as incidental. I think I'm probably on your side with that. Sign that something else has gone wrong, so it shouldn't be regarded as normal or incidental. I'm not saying charge for it. I'm saying it's a matter for you as a firm. All I'm saying is you can charge for it. And I think, David, you're right that, even in England where, and Liz might be able to help me on this, there might be a greater willingness to take out a title indemnity policy. It wouldn't be an issue as a matter of course. There would be, by its very nature, a defect in title for a defective title insurance policy to be required. But interesting debate, really interesting. I think, as David says, it's always worthwhile reviewing your fees and charges and just looking to make sure that you are maximizing returns in situations that are non-standard, and making sure that you as a firm are able to have that flexibility and ability to pivot and charge more where circumstances warrant it. And as I say, if you've given a quote or an estimate of fees without explaining to the client that there may be circumstances where a revision would be necessary, there might be an issue with regard to actually charging additional fees at a point in time later in the transaction. But I repeat the other point, that where you are adopting the issue as Ross suggests, I would let the client know that you could charge, but you're not. And I would also, I think, Ross, make sure the client was aware that there is a problem with regard to the title. And I think the other thing where we're taking out a title indemnity policy, to make sure the client understands what the policy does. So the policy doesn't perfect the title. It provides, as Robert Kelly, my dear friend, will say, a solution amongst many potential solutions to the problem, but the problem per se still exists and still remains. Great, that's really interesting, really interesting. Thanks for that. Has anyone had any issues with regard to a title indemnity? Has anyone had any problems getting cover on an unusual risk recently? Anyone encountered anything? Just interesting for my friend Liz and John to see if anyone's had a risk that you haven't been able to obtain cover for, or something that's unusual. While we're waiting for that, I want to talk about some AML issues. I'm just going to pull my notes up if I can. All right, yeah. Inspection of property by conveyancing solicitors, the real property lawyers in England. Yeah. In England, Derek, there's generally speaking a reluctance on behalf of solicitors and conveyancers to inspect residential property on behalf of clients. Commercial, different. Commercial lawyers would inspect on a client's behalf, but again, would attach caveats and conditions to the inspection. But thanks for that, Derek. I'll ask Natasha to take a copy of that and we'll have a look at it. Okay, great. So what I was going to do was just have a look at this stuff on AML. First question, is everybody happy in acting on behalf of international clients generally? So in a residential transaction, would you be happy if I said to you, I was resident in South Africa and buying a property in Scotland? There are some firms in England that immediately would say, no matter where you are, if you're an international client, there is a greater risk with regard to money laundering and the prospects of fraud. And there's one firm I know that now will not act for a client unless the client is capable of visiting an office of that firm physically. So not just a sort of Zoom or a Teams meet, but actually coming to the office. The reason is they've had problems with regard to money laundering and indeed problems with regard to fraud due to acting for clients that were resident abroad and dealing with them via email. While I'm waiting for a response to that, David, one where you couldn't get cover for a car parking space that was used by a client out with legal boundaries of the property. Buyer took the view and accepted the position. So, David, in that situation, was there an issue about whether the car parking was within the boundary of the property or on the highway or on an within an adjoining property, David? Off a private road, right? Yeah, okay, yeah, well, yeah. I'm fairly confident that Stewart Title could help you on that if you needed a policy, David. But yeah, if a client accepts the position, accepts the risk, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to come back to you, Priyanka, in a moment or two. I do a lot of work with highways and on highways. For some reason, I am the sort of honorary lawyer to the Institute of Highway Engineers. So I spent all day yesterday talking about highway issues and highway problems. And highways authorities are notorious for having poor plans and not knowing the extent of a highway, etc. It really is a nightmare. But given the fact that you're off a private road there, David, so the issue was, did the car parking space, was it within the legal boundary of the property being acquired or another property? Different issue. But I'm sure you could take out cover for that. Priyanka, high-risk country AML team would carry out enhanced due diligence, even if there's it's carried out. There are some instances where we can't act. Thanks for that, Priyanka. The point I want to make here is it's essential that where we're looking at AML issues, we don't just deal with it when we're onboarding the client, as Priyanka alludes to, that we keep aware of this is a higher risk or a high risk transaction. Now, our AML team should be able to tell us about higher risk countries, and they should be ensuring that they are keeping abreast of information from the National Crime Agency, etc., concerning higher risk countries. And the point I really want to touch on is that where you are dealing with a transaction where there are higher risk indicators, you've got to have policies in place that are alive to that risk and are cast in stone to avoid risk. But you as a fee earner are required to keep the transaction under review, and you're also required to ensure that you are complying with your firm's policies. I was just looking at some guidance for Scotland in connection with higher risk jurisdictions and the potential problem with transparency of beneficial ownership. And I think I read somewhere that with regard to beneficial ownership, that you're only required to assess risk if a beneficial owner owned more than 25% of a beneficial interest. Is that right? I don't know where I read that. I'm just trying to look where I read that, but I'm sure I read something about that somewhere. But certainly you are obliged to ascertain beneficial interests of clients who are acquiring or indeed disposing of property. I'm just trying to find the note on it. I can't at the moment. I'll try and dig it out for next time. Oh, here we are. Yeah, high-risk situations may be appropriate to examine beneficial owners with less than 25% ownership to fully understand the control and ownership of the client. Obtaining information on the customer and on the customer's beneficial owner. It's important to remember the beneficial owner of a client is the party on whose behalf a transaction is being conducted and should be treated as a client. And we also need to obtain additional information in high-risk transactions on the intended nature of the business relationship, considerations around the nature of the client transaction, and what this suggests regarding the business relationship that you'll have with the client. Is it likely to be one transaction of repetitive work? So Priyanka, again, given that we're dealing with clients from high-risk countries and dealing with the fact that we're going to be required to carry out enhanced due diligence, and we're going to have to have a higher sort of risk profile for the transaction. Can I ask a question, Priyanka? And in those circumstances, would you then charge additional fees, given that or not? And if you were anybody else getting instructions from a client from a high-risk country, would anyone just simply refuse to act and just say it's not worth this, it's not worth the trouble? And equally, are there any fairness or any firms that are now unwilling to take on what I would class as distance work, clients where the only communication is via virtual meetings and email? And again, I'm seeing a number of firms in England and Wales that are reverting back to that now because they're so worried about their exposure and risk. Okay, we've got 4 minutes left. So anyone got any topics that they'd like to discuss now or for next time? Any burning issues? Alison, Sean, Catherine, anybody got any topics for next time? Or anything you'd like to discuss at the moment? Debbie, Declan, anybody? Gerald, anything? Any burning topics? Just put the chat back up again. Nothing in the chat just yet. Any issues with sources of funds? And third-party gifts or third-party loans. How far do we go with regard to that? I think we've mentioned this before. You know, if you've got a gift from a relative, are you going to ask that relative to prove where those funds have come from? I was talking to a firm in England who was saying in those circumstances, they'd also asked the third party to provide proof that tax had been paid on that source of funds, assuming it was necessary. Right, David, okay, that's a topic for next time. We'll make a note of that. I'm going to take a photograph of it. Priyanka, all right, let's have a look at this. We'll have a look at servitude rights of access next time, and we'll have a look at the cadastral map question that David's raised. I'm just going to take a picture of that. So I've got a copy of it for my notes. Just bear with me. I'll take a picture of that. So I've got it to look at. And we'll deal with Priyanka's point. What do people do if the source of funds is inheritance, but the purchase lawyers now went bust and the client, oh gosh, client doesn't hold copy will, copy estate accounts, etc. All right. So Priyanka, that sounds like a bit of a mess to me. So are we saying, Priyanka, that the lawyer that dealt with the estate has gone bust, so that we can't access them? Right. Client doesn't have a copy will, doesn't have copy estate accounts. What can we do? There you go. Vela, thank you so much for that. Do you get that, Priyanka? Did that help? And the law, I thought that, would the Law Society have files? Yeah. And Viala, before we finish, am I saying your name right? Because I'll kick myself if I've got it wrong. Invariably, I fear that I have. But am I saying, is it Vela? Or, I assume it's Vela. Vela, hey there. Oh, thank goodness for that. That's lovely. All right. Listen, everyone, it is just about 1:30. So all that I'd like to do is once again, right? Once again, it's every time I do these forum, I have to say I've really, really enjoyed it. I'm so grateful to you for your participation. Please, please, please talk to colleagues, etc., and get them to come along. Please fire questions for us to talk about next time, or topics, or if you want speakers to come along, have a look at it. I'm trying to get a solicitor in Edinburgh who specialises in professional negligence claims to come along. But we've got loads of other people that can come and talk too. Because it's not, you know, I don't want it to just be me. I wanted, and that was the beauty of today. It was great with participation. Derek, thank you for putting your microphone on and talking to me. That's much appreciated. Thank you, Vela, for confirming and enabling me to sleep tonight, knowing that I've got your name and saying it correctly, because that terrifies me. But thank you. If you're having a break, thanks, Susan. If you're having a break over the Easter holidays, I hope you have a lovely break. I was just saying to Liz, I think there's a bit of snow forecast, isn't there? Because I was thinking about heading north, but I don't think I'm going to be doing that. We might get up into the borders, but we're not going to get too far north because I think the weather can be a bit iffy for hill walking. But thank you, Pamela, as ever, a pleasure. Ross, really enjoyed it. Yeah, please come along. If you have support staff or sort of trainees that would like to look at some of the basics of sort of Scottish land law, happy to organise that. If you wanted a commercial forum for Scotland, again, happy to explore that too. But thank you. Stay safe, everyone. Have a lovely Easter. Look forward to the next one. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, everybody else. Bye-bye.